You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. And today, we're going to talk with someone who you may recognize the name, you may know him, but I guarantee you, if you're an outdoorsman, you've seen his work. Wildlife photographer and author Paul Brown with us today on the show.
This episode of the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is brought to you by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. And today we are talking with someone who you've probably seen his name. You might have even seen his name on a byline under a photo and didn't realize it was his name, but you'd recognize the photo. He is the foremost outdoor and wildlife photographer in the state of Mississippi. Paul Brown with us here today. Paul, welcome to the show.
Good. Thank you. Glad to be here.
And I introduced you as a photographer,
Right.
Which you are. I should have said author as well. Your bio is pretty lengthy, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. But you know, I like to say I wear a lot of different hats.
Yeah.
And so I'm a wildlife photographer, and that's my number one passion.
Okay.
But I'm also a writer. I've written several books, I think 6 now, and I'm also a publisher, and I publish a lot of different books, sports related, outdoor related, that type of thing.
Yeah. I was doing some reading before we got here today, and photos in things like Field and Stream, Outdoor Life, National Wildlife, Sports Afield, Sporting Classic, North American Whitetail, Buckmaster's Whitetail Magazine, Turkey Call, Farming for Wildlife, and Mississippi Outdoors, and many others.
Yeah.
In a career for you in the outdoor and wildlife photography world that has spanned how many years?
52 or 53.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where did it start for you?
It actually really got started when I was a student at Mississippi State.
Okay.
Because right next to Mississippi State is Noxubee Wildlife Refuge. And I never hunted when I grew up. My dad didn't hunt, but he fished. So we went fishing all the time. And but when I got to State, I had a brother that was already up there in the engineering program, and he talked me into going with him out to Noxubee. And the very first time I went out there, I killed a spike, and that was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of meat for a college student, and it was really very well received. But anyway, we started hunting quite a bit. Started cutting a few classes, and
it kind of goes in hand,
right? But while I was there was a lot of downtime, and kind of for my graduation gift from high school, my father gave me a camera, and it was a little fold-up old Kodak Retina thing. That's an antique nowadays. It's a good bookcase holder, book holder. But anyway, I started taking that camera in my pocket because there was a lot of downtime at Noxubee. Even though it was a really great place to deer hunt, there was a lot of downtime sitting up on a stand. And so I started taking pictures of squirrels and woodpeckers and pileated woodpeckers, red-headed woodpeckers, red-bellied woodpeckers, and red squirrels, gray squirrels, everything. Anything I could get a photograph of. But when I'd get my pictures back, I'd look at the images, and there would be this little dark spot on the frame, and I'd say, well, I think that's a squirrel, But it just wasn't the right equipment to do wildlife stuff. And so soon after I graduated from State, I went to the camera shop and said, look, this is what I want to try to do. I want to take pictures of wildlife, but I want to get really close-up shots. And so they told me the equipment I needed, and then I was floored when I got the price tag. But I said, okay, well, rather than buying a bass boat, I think I'll buy camera equipment. Mm-hmm. And so I made the investment and started off with Canon and switched to Nikon shortly thereafter. And I've just had that passion all my life ever since that time.
Yeah. So what were you studying as a student at State during that time?
Well, I started off, when I first went to State, I started off majoring in math and computer science, of all things. And then I had to lay out of school for 3 years with a pretty serious medical issue. But when I went back to school to finish, I switched over to business and got a marketing degree. And along the way, though, I took some creative writing classes and that type of thing. And I worked at the local radio station there. I was one of the very first people at MSB, I think.
MSV, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And that was a lot of fun. But I was in charge of public relations.
Okay.
And so we had a real good time with that.
It's interesting to think about that. Of course, marketing and then obviously writing, but it sounds like the college experience, as some people call it, which for you was you were introduced to the refuge, hunting, and next thing you know, you want a camera to take those pictures. That was kind of the real education that was going on during that time.
Exactly. That's exactly right. But I didn't know it at the time. When it's right there in your face, you don't realize really what your passion is, maybe. But it took a little time, a few years to develop that. But over the years, I really had a burning desire to get the best pictures I could possibly get.
You still have that original Nikon camera your dad gave you?
No. Well, no, I do. It's a Kodak.
Okay. Sorry,
name.
Kodak.
Yeah, that's all right. But yeah, I do still have that. And it's sitting on my bookshelf kind of just to display.
Yeah.
But it was an old film camera. You couldn't even focus it. You had to guess the distance of what you're shooting. So most of the time your images were out of focus or soft anyway.
Yeah. The first time that one of your photos was published, take me back to that.
It was in a magazine called Mississippi Mississippi, not Outdoors, but
something else.
Yeah, one of the ones published out of Atlanta.
Okay.
Game and Fish, Mississippi Game and Fish magazine, and I had a deer picture I was really proud of, and I finally got them to run that, as a full page on the inside of the magazine, and that really fueled my motivation and got me to go after it a lot harder. But I realized then that it was going to be a very difficult thing to make a living just as a writer and or just as a photographer. And I kind of combined the two so that I was also writing stories. I wrote hundreds of stories for magazines and then slowly started developing, doing some books and that type of thing. And the first book I did was a book of my photography, and it's called Wildlife of the South. And so it was just Southern animals that I'd photographed during the early goings. And I published that book about 34 or 5 years ago.
That career path for you, it's so interesting for me to look back at, and hear that from you. The freelance, basically that's what it was, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's basically starting your career as a freelancer, which I remember hearing that. That's hard to do. You got to understand it's really difficult to do. Right. You were determined to make it work.
Yeah, I was. And I thought that somewhere along the way, I just had the confidence in myself, I guess, that somewhere along the way, I would figure out a better way to make money or an additional way to make money in this field. And so I started doing wildlife calendars in 1988 was my first one. So it's been quite a number of years ago since then. But I do calendars every year, and I sell those to businesses to use in their promotional efforts. And I imprint their name at the bottom of the calendar and so forth. And so that has been the core of my business model for 30-something years, I guess.
So is that one of the calendars that you brought there? That's this year's 2024 calendar.
Right.
And on the cover of the calendar, Paul T. Brown Wildlife 2024 calendar, a doe and the fawn. And for a photo like this, just say that photo, how much time are you spending out in the field to capture that?
That was probably about a week's worth of effort. But I've got other pictures too, along with those. It's just that I really liked the way that one, the mood that it created. Yeah. And a lot of the people that I sell the calendars to really like that. A lot of them are really into the baby animals. So I usually try to include one baby animal every year.
Mm-hmm.
in addition to having big bucks.
Yeah. So there's a lot of time that's invested. It's not, hey, I'm going to go on Tuesday and you load the camera up and you got a bunch of keepers.
Right.
It's kind of like fishing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that there are days you go and you don't come home with anything.
Right. Yeah, I like to say it's just like hunting, really. I've got to be close to the animal, and I like to be in bow range if I can, if not muzzleloader range. But, once they get out 300 or 400 yards out, that's not close enough even for the equipment that I use.
Okay. So for the photography hobbyists and maybe even others, pros that are listening, what kind of equipment? You mentioned Nikon cameras now.
Right.
But what kind of equipment now?
Well, everything's digital now. I don't know if you can even buy a film camera anymore. I think maybe you can. You can get one out of Nikon. They'll blow the dust off of it and sell it to you. But everybody shoots digital now. And my goodness, with the cell phones now, it's just incredible. The images you get back, at least they look good on the computer screen.
Yeah.
They don't print very well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know of any photo editors in any magazines or calendar companies or book companies that will take an image that's shot off of a cell phone.
Yeah.
So a lot of people want to know, what do I need to do when I'm sitting on a stand to take a few pictures? Kind of just take my cell phone out. And it'll look good on the cell phone, but when you start enlarging it, it just looks terrible. It has grain on it as big as a softball. So I still say you need a good digital camera. And to put more money in the lens than the camera body itself. A lot of people get hung up on megapixels and how fast the camera responds and how fast the motor drive works and that kind of thing. But still, you need a good lens. That is what the light passes through to get to your card.
Yeah.
And so, but that kind of stuff is still a little pricey,
Sure. The shutter on a camera, that's one thing I've always wondered too. So whether you're in a stand or whatever the situation is, you're within bow range or muzzle loader range, as you say, must you have a silent shutter on a camera, or do you actually hear the shutter click and does it scare the wildlife?
Right. That's a great question, and one that I get quite often. And it's really weird. I have never, to my knowledge, spooked an animal with the sound of the shutter. Now, sometimes they'll look up, like bobcats and foxes and those type of things. Boy, their hearing is just incredible, and a turkey for that matter. Mm. Although my turkeys can be 30, 35 yards away, and they just won't hear it. But also the digital cameras, as they have progressed and evolved over the years, are quieter than they were in the beginning. And now the camera that I'm using right now, it's a Z series of Nikon, a Z9, and it doesn't have a mirror on it. You see directly through the lens, and so there is no shutter, so to speak, to go off. But I've got it turned on. I've got it programmed to where it does make a little noise. It makes me feel better. It makes me feel like I'm taking a picture if the shutter goes off. But it really it doesn't seem to bother them. Of course, now sometimes if let's say a deer standing 40 yards in front of me and throws his head up to scent the area, check the area out, I may rattle off 100 pictures of him while he's doing that.
Right.
And with his Z9, it shoots 20-something frames per second. And so I just hold down on it, and it just goes nuts.
Yeah.
And it sounds more like a digital camera, a video camera going off instead of a still.
Instead of still camera.
Mm-hmm.
The Southeastern Outdoor Press Association Photo of the Year in 2019. Tell me about that photo.
Sometimes you have to know who the judges are. Mm-hmm. And I knew who the judges were, and I knew they were kind of sensitive people and really liked birds and that type of thing. So I published a photograph of a male bluebird up on a fence post feeding a baby, and I had there were blackberry bushes behind it, and one of them kind of draped over down next to the fence post, and that was the picture, and so it won Best Picture of the Year. And our conference was in Oxford that year, so we don't have it in Mississippi that often, but I like to go when it is.
Yeah. This is a broad question, I know, but what's the draw for someone like you that, where's that kick that you get out of taking a photo, regardless of what the animal is, and you come back and you sort of completed the mission and there's this sense of purpose. How do you describe that for you? Like, what's the draw to do that for you?
I think it's very comparable to what a hunter feels when he takes a big buck, especially one that he's either heard about in the area or he's seen him before and just couldn't get a shot at him or whatever. And it's a high that quite often is just only understood by people who hunt or catch a big fish or something like that. Catch a 10-pound bass, and then you get, it's pretty exhilarating to get him in the boat. But what I'll do is I'll go out on a mission, and I feel like I need to shoot about 1,000 frames per day to feel like I've really had a subject that I could work with. And they gave me several different poses and so forth. And I shoot a lot of film, but I shoot a lot of digital images now. But part of the fun and the thrill of wildlife photography is when you get back and plug your card into the computer, download them, and start looking and going through each one of them and seeing what you have and go, man, I got it. I got that one. Yeah. But then sometimes you're very disappointed too. So.
And I guess it's the case with everything.
Yeah.
You said it a bit ago. It's like deer hunting.
Right.
And you've in the sport of hunting, you're an avid hunter yourself.
Right.
You've had those ups and downs.
Yep.
What's the best hunt you've ever had yourself?
Best hunt I've ever had myself occurred in Mississippi, and it was in 2008 was the culmination of that hunt on my own property in Holmes County. And I had a real small piece of property that was about 200 acres. And it was abandoned pasture land. It was grown up in dewberry vines, blackberry bushes, little saplings. It was just no use at all to wildlife. But I really saw the potential in it. I really liked the fact that there was about 30 acres of that was open ground, was pasture land. And I just immediately thought about food plots, And so I was working very closely at that time with Mossy Oak and their seed division. And so they provided me the seeds, the biologic seeds, and I planted them, and I photographed every step of the way, from breaking new ground to just disking it up and then re-tilling it, broadcasting the seed, and then culti-packing it. And and I had the best-looking food plots in the state, I swear I did. They were pristine and lush. And I fertilized them quite often. And so in 2006, that's really when this, quote, hunt began for me with this particular hunt that I'm talking about. And it did that when I decided that I really needed some perennial food plots. And so I decided to plant the Mossy Oaks Biologic Clover Plus. And it's a blend of red and white clovers and chicory. Okay. And so I wanted to have that as a summer grazing for my deer and the turkeys as well. But so I planted it in 2006, came up and was looking really nice, and then a drought hit. And my ground turned to concrete, and it just, the clover wilted in the sun and the heat. But I had a few plots that, because they were in shade for much of the day, that still did fairly well. And so then I scouted all year round just to see what the deer were doing. And I noticed that there was a pretty good bit of traffic in my white clover patch. It had more white clover than it did red. And they were really utilizing that clover patch. And so
that would have been summer of 07?
That was the fall of 06.
Okay.
When I
fall.
planted, when I planted the clover patches. And there was about 10 total acres divided into 4 different plots. Okay. And this little area that I'm talking about was about 2 acres. And so I noticed that there was quite a bit of traffic there. But then on February the 11th, 2007, we found a shed in this food plot. And so me and one of my best hunting buddies, Tim Beard, he and I were shed hunting on February the 11th, 2007. And he went one way and I went another way. We met back up at my cabin. When we came up there, he was holding up in his right hand, he was holding up a really nice shed. It had 5 points on the one side. So I figured it was probably a 160 class 10-point. Mm-hmm. And so I was really excited about that until he brought his left hand from around his back and held up another shed that had 10 points on one side. Wow. And I was just blown away. I couldn't believe it. And so we searched for the matching shed and did not find it. But just in case I forget it, we did find it a year later.
Really?
Yeah, 1 full year later, and it was still intact.
February or ish of 2008, and it was still intact.
That's right.
Wow.
And so I have that mounted, by the way. I have the sheds mounted.
That is cool.
But anyway, so I just couldn't wait for this deer to develop the following year after this shed and see what he was going to look like, because the way we measured it out, if we had 10 points on one side, if he had 10 points on the other side and a 17-inch spread, we had a 200-inch deer on my property, and I just couldn't believe it.
Right.
So what I did is got my cutty back motion cameras. They were the first ones to make motion cameras, I think. And so that was the brand I had back then. And I set out, I believe it was 3 cameras, 2 on this one clover field, and then 1 on another clover field that I knew he was using, and there was a really good trail coming into it. And so I went back. I set those out on September the 1st, and that was in 2006. Then on September the 8th, 1 week later, and I came back and I picked up the 1 gigabyte cards. And I took it back to my cabin, put it on my laptop, and there was about 500 images on the card. And I was really excited to look and see if I had him. So I started flipping through the images. 1 through 400 was nothing but does and a little spike every now and then. And so I was really disappointed. And then when I hit image number 460, it literally knocked me off my chair. I slipped down off my chair, and I got back up, and I looked at it, and there he was in all his glory and in full velvet. And so he looked way bigger than he actually was, but oh my goodness, he was some kind of trophy. And I photographed some Boone and Crockett deer in the past in Canada, and I've hunted them in Canada. But I knew then that this was probably a Boone and Crockett deer if he had a good, a year developing and so forth, and came out of velvet okay, and stuck around on my property for that long. So over a span of, say, from September the 8th till October the 1st, when bow season started, I had photographed him about 40 to 50 times. But every one of them was in the middle of the night, 10:30 at night, 2:30 in the morning, never in daylight. Well, I say never in daylight. It was I had one daylight shot of him on September the 20th, and it was at 3:00 in the afternoon, and he had velvet hanging down from his rack and real red fresh blood on his antlers. So that was a thrilling shot. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to October the 1st, my son Mark and I decided we were going to hunt this deer pretty hard. He was a student at Mississippi State at the time. And so on the weekends, he would come over. But the first 3 weeks of bow season, it was so hot that year. The first weekend, October the 1st, I think it was 92 degrees, if I remember right. And it was just too hot. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to mess up anything. I wanted to go on days that had a chance for him to move. Mm-hmm. And so bow season came and went, never saw him, but kept taking pictures of him. And I finally got to a point where I was tired of taking pictures of him. I didn't even want to see another one of him because it was like he was in my face going, "Nan, boo boo." You can't kill me. And gun season opened November the 11th. November the 17th that year. And so we traded bows for rifles. And we were about to get serious about trying to kill this deer. And so the rut wasn't on yet, so I still wasn't worried that we weren't going to see him. I figured he would make a mistake at some point. And our rut up there in the hills right next to the delta usually was around Christmas time and sometimes a little bit later than that. And so, but I wasn't seeing him and I was getting a little disappointed. And I decided just before Christmas, a couple of weeks before Christmas, I had done a lot of talking and research and so forth. And I decided I needed to fertilize my food plots, my clover fields. There had to be something that got them moving a little bit more and utilizing my fields a little bit more. So I broadcast 300 pounds per acre of urea. And, in about almost Christmas time, they really started to show the results of that. They were really lush fields, dark green, just a beautiful field. And you could tell the utilization had picked up quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But still, we're not seeing the deer. And in early January, I sat in a shoot house 4 straight afternoons on the clover field where we had seen this buck, where I'd photographed him the most, and where we had found his shed. I thought that afforded me the best opportunity, but nothing. 4 straight afternoons I sat there and never saw a single deer. I didn't even see a doe. So I was really getting discouraged. And so I went on and committed to do a book signing in St. Louis on January the 15th. It was on a Monday. And so I went to St. Louis. I think I went up there on Saturday or Sunday and hung around a few days and did a book signing. And then on Tuesday, January the 16th, I was scheduled to meet a dear buddy of mine, Richard Day. He's from just across the river from St. Louis. And we were going to go do some waterfowl photography in southern Illinois for a couple of days. And that was going to end my season. So basically, I had thrown the towel in, said, this is it. Maybe next year I'll get another crack at him, get some more pictures of him, see how he develops in another year. But then on Tuesday morning, I noticed I had a blinking light on my motel telephone. I picked it up, and it was a message from Richard, my friend, saying that he had the flu and that he was going to have to cancel and how sorry he was, and I was really distressed over that because I had really planned on doing this waterfowl shoot. And so, faced with nothing to do, I just decided, well, I'll just get in the car and go home. And St. Louis is a pretty good way.
Yes, it is.
County. But then my mind started racing, and I said, well, I might have time to make it back for one last deer hunt to my place. And I figured I could be there about 2:30. And so I called a neighbor of mine from up there, a guy who had helped me find this place. and he's a great wildlife artist, Johnny Granberry, and he was also a good hunting buddy and fishing partner of mine. So I said, Johnny, why don't you come hunt with me this last day? And he said, man, I'm not going to hunt on your property. And I'd been asking him all year long. I said, please come hunt with me. I'm up here by myself. It's a safety issue, if nothing else. He wouldn't do it. And the reason he wouldn't do it is because he was afraid he might kill this deer. Mm-hmm. And he said he didn't want to jeopardize our friendship over a deer. And I said, our friendship would stay strong. Don't worry about that. But I had to beg him and beg him and beg him. I said, this is the last day. Please just come hunt with me this one day. He said, well, I do need some more of those greens you've got growing out in your fields. And I had turnip greens everywhere. And oh, boy, they were so good to eat. and Johnny loved them too. So he brought his little Walmart bag up there, and we went to the field and we picked greens for about an hour. And I said, Johnny, it's 3:30. It's time to go get on our stands if we're going to.
Gonna be dark soon.
Yeah. So we the weather was awful, by the way. When I left St. Louis, it was 16 degrees. It was a pretty day. It would have been a great day to be deer hunting in Mississippi. But so I asked Johnny when I called him on my way down. I said, how's the weather? And he said, man, it sucks. It is awful. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, it's 40 degrees, it's raining, and the wind's out of the east at about 20 miles an hour.
Wow.
And I said, well, it sounds just like my luck. But let's just go sit in the stand for a couple of hours. So anyway, it's gotten to be about 3:30. I gave Johnny the option of choosing stands. He knew my place very well. And he said, well, I think I'm going to go sit on a stand by that really nice clover field where we found some other sheds. And I said, well, he's using that field because I photographed him there. And so I said, I think that's a great choice. Go there. And so I said, well, I'll just go back to the tank stand is what I'd call that stand where I'd sat for 4 afternoons and not seen anything. I said, I'll just go sit there because it's good for an east wind. And so I went and crawled in the stand, got in the stand about 3:45. And of course, I didn't see anything. And all I could see was the treetops blowing across the field. They were just swaying back and forth and back and forth. And I just kept saying, I should have gone home. And if Johnny hadn't come over here with me, I would have gone home. Mm-hmm. But then, and I looked at my watch. I said, man, it's getting dark early. Looked at my watch. It was 5:30. Official sunset was 5:15 that day. And so 5:45 was last, legal shooting time. And here it was 5:30, and it was already dark like it was at 5:45. And I said, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to see anything. And 5 minutes later, I was looking way down the field, and at the far end of the field, here came 2 bucks walking side by side. I picked up my binoculars and I looked at them. My gun was sitting in the corner of the stand, not thinking I would even see anything. And so anyway, I see these 2 bucks walking side by side, and they both stop and service a scrape and do a limb lick over the scrape. And then they came toward me into my field, walking side by side. And I said to myself, well, that one on the right is a nice looking buck. And the one on the left's not that bad. But anyway, when they got up to my field, they took a 90-degree turn to my right. And I was looking at them in the binoculars when they did that. And I immediately knew it was him. When he made that turn and gave me a broadside look, I saw all of those points. Uh-huh. And so I dropped my binoculars to my chest. I reached over. I had to reach for my gun while trying to keep my eye on them. It was a circus in that stand, but I was by myself. So I finally got the gun out the window, and I actually bumped the stand with my gun, and they did do a stop, but they didn't look my way. And the wind, I think, saved me on that one. I got my gun poked out the window, got it propped up, and I put the gun on the shoulder of the buck. And then I looked up at his head, and I realized I was on the wrong deer. And so then I got to find this other one. And so, there he is, I think. And I move, and I finally find him. And I put my crosshairs on his shoulders, and I'm doing figure eights on his shoulder. I mean, I had the worst case of buck fever I've ever had in my life. I'm not too shy to admit that. But anyway, I pulled the gun over to the corner of the window and put the barrel in the window and put my finger over the barrel and just pulled down as hard as I could and just got as steady as I could get, and I fired. And when I did, the buck swirled 180 degrees and leaped the other direction and then fell over and didn't move. And so I couldn't wait but 5 minutes. Usually I wait a little bit longer than that, but 5 minutes were up. I had to go put my hands on him. So I got down and I ran over and I got down on my knees and pointed to the sky and thanked the Lord for this opportunity that I had. And what an experience that was. And I killed that deer on January the 17th, the next to last day of gun season that year. It was almost a full year later from the time that we found the shed. And the really cool thing is I ended up, like I said earlier, in the next February of 08, of finding the other shed of that deer in the woods. And I was looking for sheds then, and I found it in the woods up on a little shelf on the side of a hill. And I knew when I saw it, it was the matching shed of the one we found the year before. And so now I have two mounts. I have the mount when he was 5.5 years old, the year I killed him, and then when he was 4.5, when he had 20 scoreable points that year. He actually had less points. He had 17 scoreable points the year I killed him, but he was much more massive, wider, longer tines and everything. And one of the interesting things, too, about him is when I was photographing him in velvet, I was able to count 18 points. But somewhere during the time he lost his velvet and the time I killed him, he broke off one of his tines.
Really?
And it would have looked like, if it matched the other side, it would have been about 4 to 7 inches. Would have added that much more to the score. But it might have been a new state record. I don't know. And I have learned over the years that you can't judge a trophy by its score, even though this deer made Boone and Crockett and had a gross score of 192 and something. 192 and 3/8, and a net score of 171 and 4/8. And I had wanted to kill a Boone and Crockett deer all my life. I was eaten up with it. I was obsessed with it. So much so that I went to Saskatchewan 20 plus years in a row. And because I felt like that gave me the best opportunity to kill one. I also went to Alberta, probably went to Alberta about half the amount of time that I went to Saskatchewan. In some years I hunted both of them the same time. So I was gone to Canada for a month. But Canada is different. It's a different kind of hunting, and I had opportunities for 3 different deer that I'm sure would have made Boone and Crockett in Canada, but I just couldn't close the deal for whatever reason. I had several excuses: too far, too thick a cover, saw him for just a second, that type of thing. And I've been lucky enough to photograph a few in Canada that were 180 class typical deer. And this deer that I killed, even though he had 17 scoreable points, he was scored as a typical buck.
Okay.
And he is, at least the last time I looked at the Mississippi records, he had more scoreable points than any typical Boone and Crockett killed in Mississippi. So he was number one in that category. And total score, he's in the 20s somewhere. But he ranks high in a couple of other categories, gross score and that type thing. But anyway, so that was my best hunt ever. And I thought I had to go to Canada to have a best hunt. but it happened that it occurred right in my own backyard.
On your property in Holmes County.
Right.
Paul, what a story.
It was awesome. Yeah, it really was.
And, there were several things I was thinking about while you were telling that. One is the irony of you, maybe, arguably, maybe not arguably, the most published and well-known wildlife photographer in Mississippi, with thousands and thousands of dollars of lenses and camera gear, digital gear. But maybe the picture you got most excited about were those off that trail camera stuck over there beside that food plot.
That's right. Because I knew I could hunt him,
Yeah.
And
then the storytelling aspect of it too. I listened to you tell that story, the dates, the times, and 10,000 feet standing back, listening to you tell that story. I see someone who you tell stories. It's what you've always done with photos, you write stories, you tell stories with the word, written word on paper, in books. You're a storyteller, and all those details and dates and specific times and days are important.
Yeah. Sometimes I get a little carried away with the details because I give quite a bit of it, because that's what magazine editors want to see is detail.
Sure.
And in fact, I wrote this story for North American Whitetail magazine, and the editor and I go back for Duncan Dobie. We go back for quite a number of years. But when I first wrote the story, he asked me to keep it around 2,000 words, and I said, "It's going to be kind of tough." And so when I finished it, I sent it to him, and it was 5,000 words. And he called me and he said, "Man, you're going to have to cut this thing at least in half." And I said, "I can't do that. There's too much good stuff in there." Yeah. And so I had to go back and cut it down.
He won that argument.
Well, kind of. We settled in the middle, and I think it ended up being about 3,200 words.
Okay.
And he said, "Well, I can bump another article, and I can make this one count as 2 articles this month." I said, "Please, I just want to document this for my future, so that I'll be able to remember the hunt real well, so my kids will be able to relate to it and everything."
Sure. Before you go, and I know maybe we'll have another chance that we can talk to you about, the book publishing world and the books that you've authored and those kinds of things. But I have to ask you, you're sitting next to 2 photos of yours on the wall here.
Yes.
Chip realized it, but this photo of this duck and this photo here, those are yours. Do you remember those of all? Can you look at like those and just remember them of all the ones you've taken over the years?
A lot of times I can. I can probably do that better with deer than I can with anything else, because they're distinguished by their racks.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of times I can just remember that deer and where I was. And sometimes I forget what year it was taken. But the ducks are a little harder, because most of the male pintail ducks look the same.
Uh-huh.
I know where I was, and I know where I was on this one, but
where
that's
were you?
about it. This one here, I was in British Columbia.
Okay.
And there's a nice wildlife refuge there that has really good waterfowl opportunities during like February, when it's good and cold.
Yeah. So, good and cold up there.
Yeah. Sure. A lot of times the water is frozen. So I have to go up there when it warms up just enough to melt the ice on the ponds and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Really cool. Paul, it's a pleasure to get to talk to you. I and so many others have admired your work from a distance. And whether or not I've gotten a chance to, I don't think I had a chance to meet you over the years. So this has been a real treat for me.
Good.
And, they say time flies when you're having fun. Time flew today.
Oh, did it? Well.
But I really enjoyed it.
All right. Great. I enjoyed it. It's my pleasure to be here. And because I'm a Mississippi State graduate, I'm very familiar with you. You do the most awesome job on the color commentary on the radio for football.
Well, thank you.
It's just excellent.
Well, and now that I know that there are folks like you, you're a diehard Bulldog fan, but you're in a deer stand a lot during the fall. I try to remember that while I'm in that booth. I'm talking to somebody who's in a deer stand right now with his earpieces in. He can't be here.
That's right.
So I have to describe it for you.
Exactly.
It's good to meet you, and thank you again.
My pleasure.
Paul Brown here on the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. Hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Thanks for listening. We'll see you outdoors.